Yeah.
Has any modern day archaeologists ever found Goliath shield and helmet and all that?
That David was made up. You know, that David was just an Israelite, just a made up thing, and then they found somewhere an inscription of David, you know, the king. But I haven't heard of anything else. Okay. Well, we'll go ahead and start this second section. It's going to kind of continue on in the life of David, and you wonder. I've kind of started this with, you know, is there life after Goliath? Right? Because defeating this giant has got to be a big point in David's life, and you wonder, is this it? Does anything get better? Right? Is there anything else after this? And I think we're going to find within David's life that there's kind of a pattern here. There's kind of an up and down, right? And we're going to kind of hit some of the highlights through his life in this idea of remembering and then forgetting and then remembering. And where this shows and how this relates to courage. So you think about David's life after he kills Goliath, and things go well. I mean, things continue to go well. He marries Saul's daughter. He becomes a captain of part of Saul's army. We do see the jealousy of Saul and the envy of Saul start to take hold as they come back after he's killed Goliath, and the song of the ladies of Saul has killed his thousands, David his 10,000s, and Saul begins to say, okay, what are we going to do with this guy? Now Saul already knows, or he should know, that the kingdom is gone as far as he's concerned. He's going to lose that, but he's really starting to worry about David. He tries to kill David in various ways. At one time, when he says that, okay, you can marry my daughter, the bride price is going to be 100 foreskins of the Philistines. Now, we're all adults here. We're not getting that without killing them, right? I mean, that's not going to happen. So you're going to have to kill these guys. And he's thinking, well, the Philistines will take care of David. And so David comes back not with 100, but with 200. And so Saul is really starting to get even more worried. And a couple of times as David is playing his lyre for the king to soothe him when this evil spirit comes, Saul, throws a spear at him. I mean, that's hard not to take that hint, right? I mean, he's trying to get rid of you. So he's trying to kill him, and David has a friendship with Saul's son, Jonathan, and Jonathan warns David that the king is for sure after him, and so David flees, and he runs from Saul. He, in chapter 24, as Saul is chasing him, David is hiding in a cave. And Saul goes into the cave to use the facilities, and David is right there. I mean, he's close enough that he can cut off the corner of Saul's robe. And there are people there with David saying, this is your chance, kill him. And David says, no, I won't do that. I will not raise my hand against the Lord's anointed. He still sees Saul as anointed as king by God until God removes him, right? And so Saul leaves the cave and gets out a little ways. David comes out of the cave and bows down to Saul and says, I just want you to know this is how close I was. And I didn't kill you. I spared your life. Why are you chasing me? right? But it doesn't stop Saul. He continues on at another time. It's in chapter 26. David has the opportunity to kill Saul again. This time Saul's asleep. And David comes into the camp while Saul's asleep, takes his spear and takes his water jug. And there's a guy there again with David saying, if you don't want to, I'll do it, right? And I think it's almost funny the way it reads, because the guy says, I'll only stab him once, right? I mean, I won't go overboard. I'll just do it once, and it'll be done. And David says, no, we can't do that. And again, he lets Saul know, listen, I have spared your life now twice. And he gets on to Abner, who is the captain of Saul's army, and says, you need to pay attention. The king was asleep, and I was right there and could have killed him. But all this time, David still remembers. He still remembers that God is the king, right? He still remembers that God is, and even in the face of these things where he has the chance, I think it takes some courage here in this place to go, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to kill him. Even though I've got the chance, I'm not going to do it. In chapter 30, David and his group are living in a place called Ziklag. They've gone out to try to join the Philistines. When they come back, the Amalekites have raided. The Amalekites are a fun group. If you start studying through the Old Testament, Dale Manor from Harding University says they're the whack-a-mole of the Old Testament. That every time you think they're gone, another one pops up somewhere, right? So the Amalekites have come in and they've raided and they've taken all of the families and made off with them. And the people are about ready to stone David, right? It's chapter 30, verse 6. David was greatly distressed, for the people spoke of stoning him, because all the people were bitter in soul, each for his sons and daughters. But David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. Over and over throughout this time, David goes to the priest, and he will go to and ask God, what is it you want me to do? Well, in this case, he goes, should I go after the Amalekites? Can I take them? All the time, he's remembering that God is the one that's in charge. And things seem to go really well for him. He continues to see Saul as God's anointed. At the end of 1 Samuel, Saul is killed. Saul's wounded in battle. The narrative says that Saul's wounded in battle, and he is afraid that the Philistines are going to get him while he's still alive. And so he asks his armor bearer to kill him. And his armor bearer won't do it, so Saul kills himself. And his armor bearer kills himself. And in the opening of 2 Samuel, another Amalekite shows up to talk to David, and he says, I've found Saul and Jonathan, and they're dead. And so David says, what happened? What happened to them? And he said, well, Saul was wounded, and he asked me to kill him, and so I did it. And David said, it's by your own words that you are judged guilty, and he orders this man executed, because he says, how dare you lift your hand against the Lord's anointed? He still sees this. He's still faithful to what God has set up. In chapter 7 of 2 Samuel, we see David's heart again for what he thinks God wants. He tells Nathan the prophet, hey, listen, I'm in this palace, and the Ark of the Covenant of God is still in a tent, and I want to build a temple. And Nathan says, you go right ahead, right? This is one of those times when Nathan should have asked. Because later that night, God comes to Nathan and says, you tell David no. He's not going to build me a house. In all the time that I came out from the Israelites, I never dwelled in a house. I didn't ask for one. But instead, I'll build him one. I'll build David a house. I'll build David a dynasty. And one of his descendants will sit on my throne, on the throne of this kingdom forever. And we see that David's life just keeps going up and up and up. But then comes the forgetting. We can't gloss over this. Chapter 11 of 2 Samuel. This is the spring of the year, the time when the kings go out to battle. Right? It's war season. I didn't know there was one, but it's war season, right? And here they go. But David doesn't go. David sends his army. He sends Joab, his commander, but he stays at home. I think we see David forget where he belongs as the leader of God's people. He stays home. And while he stays home, he gets up and he looks out his window, and there's Bathsheba bathing on the roof. There's no one else around. So David says, "Who is she?" He finds out who she is, and he forgets. He forgets that Bathsheba is a person, that she is the wife of someone else. And so he sends for her, and he sleeps with her. And then he gets the message. She's pregnant. Now we're in trouble. Where's Uriah? Uriah the Hittite is with David's men where he belongs, but David sends for him. Maybe this can stop it. And Uriah comes home. And David says, "Take it easy, rest." And Uriah will not go and sleep at his own house. He says, "Well, how can I do this? When my brothers are in battle, how can I be comfortable here at home?" And now we're in trouble again. David forgets that Uriah the Hittite seems to have more integrity than the king of Israel. So he writes a note. He writes a little note for the commander of the army, seals it up, gives it to Uriah, and says, "Take this to Joab." And Joab receives the message, and he opens it, and it says, "Okay, here's what you do. You put Uriah at the front. You put him where the battle is raging. And when it really escalates, you order everybody else to withdraw." And Uriah is killed. And we're in the clear. We're in the clear until Nathan comes. This is one of my favorite passages of Scripture. I always look at my wife and do that because she says I have a whole bunch. I love this. The Lord sent Nathan to David. He came and he said there were two men in a certain city. There was one rich and one poor. The rich man had many flocks and herds. The poor man had nothing but one little ewe lamb, which he had bought. He brought it up, and it grew up with him and his children. He used to eat his morsels, drink from his cup, and lie in his arms. It was like a daughter to him. Became a traveler to the rich man, and he was unwilling to take one of his own flock of his herd to prepare for the guest who had come to him. So he took the poor man's lamb and prepared it for the man who had come. David's anger was greatly kindled against the man, and he said to Nathan, "As the Lord lives, the man who has done this deserves to die. And he shall restore the lamb fourfold because he did this thing, and because he had no pity." And Nathan said, "You are that man." The Lord of Israel said, "I took you from following your father's sheep, and I gave you everything. And if that wasn't enough, I would have given you more. But you took the only thing Uriah had, and then you had him killed." David forgot that even though he could hide it from everybody else, God still watches. Courage is described in a lot of different ways, but it's one of what we call virtues, part of your character. And that one of those definitions of character that really grate at you is it's the things you do when you don't think anybody else is watching. And David forgot. It's kind of a low point for him. But David remembers again. With all of the things that David's done, I look at this and this may be some of the most courageous things that he does moving forward. Psalm 51. This is the Psalm of David when Nathan the prophet went to him after he had gone to Bathsheba. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your steadfast love, according to your abundant mercy. Blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. I know my transgressions and my sin is ever before me. Against you, you only, have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight, so that you may be justified in your words and blameless in your judgment. Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. Behold, you delight in truth in the inward being, and you teach me wisdom in the secret heart. Purge me with hyssop, and I will be clean. Wash me, and I will be whiter than snow. Let me hear joy and gladness. Let the bones that you have broken rejoice. Hide your face from my sins, and blot out all my iniquities. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me, and cast me not away from your presence, and take not your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation, and uphold me with a willing spirit. Then I will teach transgressors your ways, and sinners will return to you. Deliver me from blood guiltiness, O God of my salvation, and my tongue will sing aloud of your righteousness. Lord, open my lips. My mouth will declare your praise. For you will not delight in sacrifice, or I would give it. You will not be pleased with a burnt offering. The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. O God, you will not despise. Do good to Zion in your good pleasure. Build up the walls of Jerusalem. Then will you delight in right sacrifices and burnt offerings and whole burnt offerings. Then bulls will be offered on your altar. David faces up to God and admits it. Sometimes that takes a lot of courage to admit where we've messed it up. But he does. He sees, you see, more courage as David faces the consequences of this sin. God forgives David, but he doesn't take away the consequences. Back in chapter 12, 2 Samuel, Nathan says that the child that you had with Bathsheba will die. And when the child gets sick, David mourns and fasts, refuses food, refuses everything. And then the word comes that the child is dead. His servants know it and they don't want to tell him. Because if he's doing this while the child's sick, what will he do when he dies? And when they came and they told David that the child was dead, he got up and he washed his face. And they didn't really understand what was going on. And they said, wait a minute, the whole time this child's sick, you didn't eat anything, you just sat and you mourned, you were in sackcloth. I mean, you're grieving already. And he says, who knows, that maybe the Lord would change his mind while the child was sick. I can't bring him back, but I can go where he is. He faced it. Another consequence of this sin was that Nathan said that violence, the sword will not leave your house. Right? There's going to be a lot of trouble in the house of David, and there is. One of his daughters, Tamar, is raped by one of her brothers, Amnon. Amnon is killed by one of his brothers, Absalom. Absalom tries to take the throne, and he's killed. And all through this, David faces these consequences. God, he remembers who God is, that God is the one who gave to him. He remembers that God's a God of mercy, grace, and forgiveness. And it gives him the courage to go back. It's the same thing for us. Remembering that God is a God of mercy and a God of love can give us the courage to go back when we've messed it up. It doesn't take away the consequences. but the relationship with God can be restored. We need to remember that, again, that this is God's story and not ours. This is about what God does and who God is. And we see how we fit into that story. When we remember who God is, when we remember what God has done, when we remember what God has done and the fact that God has continued to work through some very flawed people. Noah was blameless, but after the flood, Noah plants a vineyard, gets drunk. There's a video series I saw not very long ago that compares Noah to Adam. And Adam ends up naked and ashamed, and so does Noah. And something has to be done. That Abraham, the father of faith, 2 times says, "No, she's my sister." And the other time, he and Sarah say, "We don't need to wait for God. Let's just have a child with this Egyptian servant named Hagar." Jacob, who cheats his brother out of a blessing, out of a birthright. Moses, who murders an Egyptian and tries every way in the world to begin with to get out of God's service. David, that we looked at here, and the list goes on and on and on. People like Peter, Paul, great heroes of faith, but certainly had their moments. We remember what God's done even through people like us. And we remember his promises. That we can go through this book from Genesis forward and we will not find a time when God was not honest. When God did not keep a promise that he made. David knew when he faced Goliath that God's able to do this because God will protect Israel. So he was courageous. God asks us to do things based on his promises. We can find the courage to be obedient. David is described, this is a kind of a confusing statement sometimes. David is described as a man after God's own heart. When you see David's flaws, especially when you get into 2 Samuel and you see some of these things that he does, you just go, it's hard to put your head around that. Several years ago, I got to listen to Dr. David Lane. Dr. Lane preached for the Marsalis Avenue Church of Christ in Dallas, and he was in Little Rock for an elders seminar thing, and he brought this up, and it's one of those things that stuck with me. He said a lot of times we look at the man after God's own heart as being a pattern, right? That he's like God in this way, and he said, he goes, I want you to think about this maybe in a different sort of way. He said, my daughter, or he goes, my office is in the basement of my house in St. Louis. And he goes, my daughter would leave the house and walk to school. So one day she came back home from school. He goes, I heard the door slam. He goes, and there was something wrong. He said, so I went upstairs. He goes, and she was standing at the door with her back to that door. And he goes, she's just breathing really, really heavy. And he goes, I said, what's wrong? And she said, it's the neighbor's dog. He's after me. And he said, I thought about that in regard to David. That's somebody that's chasing after God's will. He didn't always get it right, but he chased after it. I've got an old yellow lab, so he doesn't do this much anymore. But when he was younger, He loved the tennis ball. Right? You get a tennis ball out, he was ready. And we used to do something every once in a while that you probably think is kind of cruel. We would take the tennis ball and we'd take it out there and we'd act like we were going to throw it and he'd take off. Right? And then we'd throw it the other direction. He was still after that ball. But we might have to take him and show him where it was. I kind of think of that sometimes in relationship to how I follow God. I'm after it. Sometimes he's going to have to show me where it is, because I may go the wrong direction. This seems to be David. David seems to be one who wants to chase after God. I wonder how we do that. I wonder how we have the courage day by day to keep chasing, to do the little things, or maybe even the big things. Now, many of us are asked to tackle a 9-foot giant with 200-pound armor. We are asked to do a lot of other things, right? We're asked to love. We're asked to serve. We're asked to forgive. We're asked to be examples, those kinds of things. And I wonder how it is that we get the courage to do that day by day. And I think it ties back to where we started and where we talked about with David, and that's the idea of remembering. That we remember who we belong to. We remember the one we follow. The one who came to us in a manger. That says, I want to be with you. And the one whose life ended on a cross that says, and I'll do what it takes to be there. I think we remember to do these kinds of things, and we remember that as we do things like we're doing tonight. As we look at what God's done. As we bring our kids to a thing like Vacation Bible School, where we can begin to tell them the things that were written before, so they can begin to remember who they are. And that we have the courage to continue to follow day by day and to chase after God even when we mess it up, but to run back and have the courage to face him again. Because what he wants is to love us, and what he wants is to be with us. That's all I've got. Thank you all. I told you I'd have you out here before the kids got here. Randall did make this announcement last night. I do want to correct it. He said that, you're free to leave, however, you have to take your kids. That still is correct. But he also said that Jeff and Stacy would take them if you didn't. Parker and Abby will take them if you don't. All right? Thank you.